Last week we talked about living in submissive love, and today we investigate Peter's final theme of his first letter, and that's suffering. So welcome to church, everybody. We're going to talk about suffering today. How many of you, just by a show of hands, think suffering is a bad thing? How many of you think suffering is a bad thing? I honestly was expecting to see all the hands go up, because I heard somebody say it's no fun. It is no fun. In the past, when I've thought of suffering, sometimes my mind would go to, how could we put an end to suffering? Sometimes when you ask young kids like what they might want to do to change the world, they might say, I want to end all suffering. And that sounds like a really great idea. It's really not a bad idea because God didn't create us to suffer to begin with. Suffering really is only a result of sin in the world. But Peter here in the letter of 1 Peter is reminding us that suffering is expected if we aim to live as Christians in a world corrupted by sin. I want to say that again. Suffering is expected if we aim to live as Christians in a world that's corrupted by sin. So I want to go ahead and turn to 1 Peter chapter 4 this morning. We stopped at verse 11 last Sunday, so we're going to pick up at verse 12. It only makes sense. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 through 16. I'll read these first, and then, we'll make it through the end of the letter today. So here's what it says. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. But rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. If you suffer, it should not be as a murderer or thief or any other kind of criminal or even as a meddler. However, if you suffer as a Christian, do not be ashamed, but praise God that you bear that name. So non-believers are often surprised at the intentional choice Christians make to continue in remaining pure and continue in righteousness. But Christians, I believe Peter is telling us, Christians should not be surprised when non-believers reject us and persecute us or insult us or make fun of us or embarrass us. We shouldn't be surprised when the world treats us that way. In fact, I think Peter's actually telling us we should expect it to happen. We see the phrase fiery ordeal in verse 12. Peter says, do not be surprised at this fiery ordeal. And it sounds really intense. However, fiery ordeal does not imply that the believers are being threatened by fire, though I'm sure that's happened at some point in the past. That's not what Peter's talking about here. Rather, he's implying that believers are being refined and being made more holy by enduring these trials, talking about a refining fire. And we're gonna talk about that in just a little bit, but because Peter brings that up again in verse 17. We'll get there. But for now, let's stick here in this paragraph. The phrase we need to be very careful to not misinterpret is the phrase, to test you. I want to read this again. Do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you. Bad theology would say that everything happens for a reason and that everything, both good and bad, comes from God. James, in his letter, just before 1 Peter, James is clear that actually only the things that are good and perfect come from God. James would be clear in James chapter 1 that temptation and sin and evil, these things are